My name is James Gallegos. I'm a marriage and family therapist, work at Compulsion Solutions, an inpatient facility in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we're thrilled to be part of the Porn Harms Be Aware campaign. We are asked to participate, and our role here today is to give a brief talk on what sex addiction is in terms of what we see here as a facility that treats people with sex addiction. And the focus today, what I want to do is, even though I have a slide here with a PowerPoint slide, I really want this to be not a PowerPoint presentation. I'd like this to be a conversation. And so what I'm going to do is run through a short, very broad-based look at sex addiction, not knowing the audience and what your specific needs are. Each one of these topics could be its own topic. So what I'm rather going to do is just take a very broad viewpoint and try to get a discussion going. So for many of you out there, maybe you are someone who is struggling with sex addiction. Maybe you're somebody who is a partner of somebody, or maybe you just don't know yet. You're here for the first time, hearing sex addiction for the first time. I'm hoping that no matter your experience with this, you're going to get something out of today. So I'm going to run through this. Hopefully everybody here has seen a first slide up, which is called Introduction to Sex Addiction, and that's what we're going to do. Let me show you what we're going to talk about today, if I can just figure this out. So I want to point out, though, that on your screen, if the slide is too small or too big, there should be a zoom ability towards the bottom where you can adjust it to 100%, 200%, or 50%. So I think that everybody should be able to fine-tune to their own liking. Okay? So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. This is topics of discussion. Let me center this a little bit for us. Okay. We're going to take a crack at what is sex addiction. There are a lot of definitions out there, and I'm going to borrow from a few folks who've done this before us, and we're going to talk a little bit also from our personal perspective what we think sex addiction is here. We'll look at types of sex addiction. There are all kinds of behaviors that fall into the realm of sex addiction. We'll look at what causes sex addiction, some of the various theories out there, where it comes from. Is it a nature deal? Is it a nurture deal? Is it both? I want to talk about symptoms of sex addiction. For many people who are perhaps not sure whether they are, or maybe you're a partner of somebody who's showing these symptoms, I'll share with you some of the classic symptoms of somebody who really is starting or beginning or in the throes of struggles of sex addiction. And I do want to spend some time talking to the partners of sex addicts. And when I use the word partners, I'm not talking just wives. I'm talking partners of sex addicts. That could be family members. It could be husbands. It could be somebody who's in a gay and lesbian relationship. Anybody who's a partner or affected in an intimate relationship with somebody who struggles with sex addicts, it's important that you know there's help out there. And I'm going to give some basic information today about that. And then we'll spend some time talking about treatment and solutions. Specifically here, what I do at Compulsion Solutions with George Collins. George is the founder of Compulsion Solutions, has been doing this a very, very long time. And we have a specific way we work, and I'll share that with you, this audience, which seems to get really good results with the clients that come through here. And then last, what we're going to do is really open this up for Q&A. I really want this to be something that's conversational. Granted, it's going to be a lot of it's on chat. What I'll probably do with the chat when we get to that section, as opposed to texting or chatting back with you via texting, I'll read the question. I won't put your name out there because obviously maybe you want to remain anonymous, but I'll just read the question, and I'll do my best to answer it. We also have George Collins here. George, even though you don't see him on the screen, is my mentor. He's here on hand also to answer questions if you stump the panel. Okay? So let's talk about what is sex addiction. I'm going to go to the next slide and center that for you. Okay. And before I jump ahead, can I just get a few confirmations via chat that you're seeing this okay? Let me get a few feedbacks first before I proceed. Thank you, Ron. Letitia, thank you. Amanda, thank you. Okay, it looks like we're good. Again, if you need to make any adjustments on your end, I believe it's you can adjust it accordingly on your own computer. All right, different definitions. I'm going to borrow from a few folks. Patrick Carnes, I'm not sure if you folks are familiar with Patrick Carnes, but Pat's been, as a licensed clinician, has been doing work with sex addicts for about as long as George has. And he looks at it in a clinical point of view. He looks at some of the themes that I've borrowed from him are recurrent failure to resist sexual impulses, engaging in those behaviors to a greater extent over a longer period of time, and unsuccessful efforts to stop or reduce or control the behaviors. So again, the quotient there is this unmanageability. It increases over time. I'm thinking about it all the time. I know I need to stop. I'm trying to stop this, and I just can't stop it. Schneider is also a person I refer to. He speaks to three areas: compulsivity, which is the loss of the ability to choose freely whether to stop. There's this powerlessness to it. I know I need to stop, but I just simply can't. There's continuation despite serious consequences, money, damages to your marriage, your family, your career, you name it. And despite all this, intellectually we may grasp that, but yet the addict will continue on despite all these known consequences. And also the third part is an obsession. You cannot help from thinking about his particular sexual thoughts. You got compulsivity, consequences, obsessive, and it's just still trucking. Others look at this as a sex addiction as an intimacy disorder characterized by compulsive sexual thoughts and acts, and where the addict has to intensify the addict behavior to achieve the same results. That's sort of like reaching for the next rung of the ladder. If you think about the nature of the body and anything, whether it's a food we eat or an activity that we do, after a while that activity becomes stale. The endorphins don't get the endorphin rush, the adrenaline rush stops. There's a steady state the body reaches after a while, and sex is no different. For people who struggle with addiction, whether it's strictly just online porn or whether it's something other than that, there's reaching for the next thrill. There's an insatiability quotient to sex addiction. And although this is not a definition, I want to point out that the DSM, which is the Bible for psychotherapy, does not consider sex addiction an addiction. There's been lots of talk around that, but simply they're looking at it more as a hypersexuality, a form of hypomania or anxiety. And the reason I share that with you is if any of you are looking for help or going through help, and you will not be diagnosed as a sex addict. There's good news and bad news about that. I think I'll let you look into it yourself, but there is no such thing as a diagnosis. So if you're seeking help through a therapist or an MD, you will not be diagnosed as somebody who struggles with sexual addiction. According to the DSM, there is no such thing, even though all of us probably know better. Okay? So that's a real brief description of what sex addiction is. I hope you get the general theme. There's an unmanageability, there's consequences, and yet you just can't stop anyway. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. I'm going to center that for you, and hopefully you're seeing that okay. Okay, you should all be seeing a slide now called Types of Sex Addiction. And by no means does this cover everything in the book. This is just a few of the things that kind of fall into the realm. And I want to make the distinction between sex addiction and sex offenders. Just because someone looks at pornography or has a certain activity does not mean they're going to progress to the point where they start to molest, rape, or get into things that break the law. We're all wired differently. Some people will just stay with one thing or not. Well, when I talk about the progression, you can progress within the same behavior. It doesn't mean you're going to go from one stage to the next, and jump different behaviors. Types of sex addiction that we see here, there's compulsive masturbation. There's people who have multiple extramarital affairs, consistent use of pornography, whether it's print media or, in our case, a lot of cyber sex, which with phone sex, webcams, chat rooms, more of an interactive quotient. There's people who frequent prostitutes and get sexual massages via massage parlors. Obsessive dating through personal ads kind of falls a lot sometimes into what's called love addiction. There's lots of people who don't perhaps use pornography, but have a problem with sex within inappropriate relationships, dating, for example, people who are married, people who are inappropriate, unavailable emotionally. That's also a form of sex addiction or love addiction that I want to address. Then we get into some of the more serious realms where this can land you in a whole host of trouble. There's people who are voyeurs and exhibitionists, and of course the more serious, which is people who molest and rape, or what's commonly known as sex offenders. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next, which is what causes sex addiction. And again, I'd like to get just confirmation that everybody's hearing me okay and seeing this okay. Can I get just a few notes that everybody's on the What Causes Sex Addiction slide and hearing me all right? Great. Thank you, Haiti and Ron. Great. Thank you so much. Okay, what causes sex addiction? Well, lots of things. Some people think it's a nature deal. Before I get into sex addiction, addiction as a whole really is a family disease. It's something that really is passed down from generation to generation in both our DNA and also in the nurturing or the culture within the family. When we talk about the nature, for people who struggle with addiction, whether it's sex addiction, alcoholism, drug abuse, or eating disorders, if you did a very, very valid and in-depth genealogy report on your family, chances are you'd find your family history is littered throughout with people who struggle with addictive behaviors. So it's something that is really we're hardwired for. Now, just because you come from a family background of people who struggle with addiction does not mean you're going to be an addict. There is a nature quotient, how your family brings you up. Did you get good role modeling around intimacy? But I did want to point out that there is a nature and a nurture deal to what causes sex addiction. Again, looking at some of the different viewpoints, Patrick Carnes, who I quoted from earlier, really talks about the negative core beliefs that I'm going to paraphrase this. I don't have his direct quotes in front of me, but it's about if people really saw me for who I was, they wouldn't like me. They'd abandon me. So if people knew my secrets, there's a very negative self-esteem at the base of sex addiction. There's also the negative self-esteem. There's the primary need that sex is my most primary need. There's also a feeling that I can't depend on people to satisfy my needs. So if you put those two together, you have this sort of perfect storm where you have sex as a primary need, and you also believe that people cannot satisfy my needs, so there's a real justification to compartmentalize your life and keep your sex addiction secretive, especially if you're in an intimate relationship like a marriage. So addicts tend to really justify and compartmentalize this way, but this comes from a real negative sense of self, according to Patrick Carnes. Other things we see and you'll see in research is unresolved family issues, emotional escapism. It shouldn't be a big secret, to know that research has shown that sex addicts often come from dysfunctional families where there's high bouts of neglect, abuse, or intimacy issues. So it doesn't. With current, you oftentimes will see people talk about sex addicts coming from they were sexually abused, and yes, that is common with sex addicts. George and I here at Compulsion Solutions, I would say probably we see as many people who aren't abused who come from some sort of more of a subtle, low-level neglect within the family. The very low levels of intimacy, not good, healthy boundaries around sex. There really doesn't seem to be a lot of around how to relate to one another. So we see a different kind of brand. But again, neglect, abuse, intimacy issues, dysfunctional families certainly increase the likelihood of somebody having a sex addiction. The latest, a lot of the research now, though, is on neurological or neuropsychology, which is chemical in the brain. Are we just simply hardwired? Do we have a clinker in our thinker, so to speak? They're feeling the addicted brain fools the body that these acts are more pleasurable than others. People addicted to sex achieve a euphoric feeling, probably more so than anybody else. We just get more of a high from it and seek pleasure and avoid unpleasant feelings. Again, coping mechanisms. Sex addiction is a big coping mechanism. It's something that we learn to use to self-soothe, to feel better, to feel bouts of boredom, anger, loneliness. So it's really something that's been around for a long time. So again, hopefully you see here from other negative core beliefs from our family roots, and some people feel we're just simply hardwired. Okay, on to the next slide. Symptoms of sex addiction. And I'm getting a few questions. Ethan, I saw your question. And hang on to that. We'll come back to that. I think we have a few more slides to go through because some of this might be answered as we go. but it's a good question, and make sure that if I don't answer it in the next couple of slides, let's get to that. Okay, so symptoms of sex addiction. By all means, again, this does not encapsulate everybody, but if you're somebody who is thinking, I'm not sure